You're listening to the Useful Science Podcast, produced in collaboration with the Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center. This week we're talking about Asian giant hornets, aka murder hornets. Useful Science is a website where we post one-sentence summaries of scientific research relevant to your everyday life. On this podcast, we bring on a rotating panel of our science contributors to pick out a few items from the Useful Science archives and dive deep into them. So while the website gives you the short, tweetable version of scientific research, our goal here is to give you the full story. Let's meet our hosts for this week.
Hi, I'm Joshua Conrad Jackson, and I'm a PhD student in the psychology department at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I study how culture changes over time and the impact of culture on human psychology.
Hi, I'm Avaneesh Narla. I'm a PhD student in the physics department at University of California at San Diego, and I currently am doing research on how bacteria coexist.
My name is Cameron Spencer. I'm not a scientist. I'm a web developer and a web designer, and I work on the Useful Science website. So, Josh, let's start with you. Give us a little bit of an introduction here about what's going on with these murder hornets.
Yeah, happy to. So, murder hornets, Asian giant hornets, are just one of many species of hornet that primarily lives in Japan and China and Southeast Asia, but were recently documented in the United States. And this documentation was publicized in a May 2nd article in the New York Times. So I'll speak a little bit about what murder hornets are, but mostly I'm going to speak about how we're reacting to them and some of the potential fallout from these reactions. And murder hornets are scary. There's no doubt about it. They're really notorious because they're the largest hornet and they inject the largest quantity of venom out of any hornets. So they can get to be the size of a human thumb. They have a 1/4-inch stinger that injects strong enough venom to kill most people if stung more than 30, 40 times. But the way that we're responding to these hornets could be deadly too. And the human fear of murder hornets since this New York Times article was published could actually damage the insect ecosystem far more than the hornets ever could.
So it takes 30 to 40 stings, like it takes a swarm to kill a person.
It really depends on the size of the person, but yeah, you need a swarm to kill a person. A single sting will not be enough to kill a person unless they're allergic.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they were documented very recently in one region of Northwest Washington State, Whatcom County. And this New York Times article was published shortly after that and has led to a lot of fear and anxiety that spread far outside of Whatcom County. And so just to give you an example of what this has looked like, fake signs have been posted on hiking trails throughout Washington, warning of murder hornet sightings in places that have had no sightings. So these are practical jokers probably. And insect experts from around the country have been fielding thousands of calls from scared residents who've mistaken yellow jackets, bumblebees, wasps, other hornet species for Asian giant hornets. So according to a Washington Post article that was published on May 27th, searches for the terms how to kill hornets, hornet spray, and hornet trap have increased by about 20 to 30-fold in May versus April and March. And while these concerns are understandable, they have a potentially destructive side effect because according to this same Washington Post article, experts suggest that there is a high probability that people are buying more insecticide and wiping out other insect species that are playing an important role in the American and worldwide ecosystem. And this brings me to the article I'll describe today, which is called Worldwide Decline of the Entofauna, a review of its drivers. This was published in the Journal of Biological Conservation by Francisco Sanchez Bayo and Chris Whitehouse. And the paper reviews 73 different reports of insect declines from across the globe and estimates that 40% of the world's insect species might go extinct over the next few decades. So that's a huge percentage. The paper also describes 4 major reasons why insects are going extinct. These are habitat loss and urbanization, pesticides and fertilizers, pathogens and introduced species, and climate change. And all of these factors are important and can fill useful science episodes of their own, but today I'll focus on insecticides and pesticides since increased insecticide use is a direct consequence of fears about the Asian giant hornet. In total, 13% of extinction reports explicitly cite pesticide as the leading cause, according to this review article. And insecticide, kind of by definition, is far deadlier to all insects than other kinds of pesticides like herbicide and fungicide, which are designed to kill weeds and fungal infections. Herbicides actually have another really insidious effect on insect extinction because they reduce plant diversity and kill off plants that insects rely on for survival, but I'll focus on insecticides today. Now, people often use insecticides on their lawns, insect colonies around their houses, and gardens that they want to protect. But a large percentage of excess insecticide gets into the air and occupies pollen and nectar in flowers. Honeybees, butterflies, and hoverflies have all seen large drops in population because of insecticide poisoning and insecticide pollution. And this pollution also has the side effect of depleting the primary food source of nectar-focused insects. Many brands of insecticide by the company Bayer, which we're probably all familiar with, contain a specific chemical called, let me see if I can pronounce this correctly, neonicotinoid, which is pretty similar to nicotine and sounds similar. And this doesn't just kill insects, it actually depletes the immune systems of bees. And so colonies become more susceptible to infection from a wide range of pathogens that have nothing to do with the insecticides. A lot of these insecticides, especially those that contain neonicotinoid, were banned by the EPA in 2014, but the ban was reversed by the White House administration in 2018, and it's still an ongoing issue between the EPA and the White House. And some of these insecticides are still available for purchase by just you and I. And while most people use insecticides to kill land-dwelling insects, these insecticides often make their way into water supplies too, through runoff and evaporation, and they have a really devastating impact on aquatic insects and crustaceans. And so, as an example of this, insecticides have directly contributed to decreases in dragonfly populations, and they also kill fish larvae, which depletes the main source of food for many other aquatic insects. Insecticides can even kill insect species in more surprising ways, like transmission through larger mammals. For example, farmers often use insecticide in areas of pasture containing livestock, and insecticide and pesticide residues are eaten by the cows, and then they're transmitted through cow dung, and they've contributed to a huge drop in the population of dung beetles, especially in America because it kills their developing larvae in the dung. And they also can kill off small birds and bat species, which help regulate insect populations and prevent any single insect from dominating ecosystems. So for all of these reasons, there's a really high correlation between the areas where insect species are going extinct and the areas where people are using pesticides the most. So for example, California farmlands have especially high rates of insect extinction, and most of these extinction patterns were first documented in 1997, which was 2 years after systematic pesticides were introduced into the state in 1995. And the same trend is true for honeybee extinction. The species declines at about 1% per year now, which is an enormous rate. And this decline started immediately after the introduction of DDT insecticide in agriculture, which is an especially powerful form of insecticide. And this isn't the only reason, of course, why honeybee populations are declining. Agricultural expansion is taking away biodiversity that honeybee colonies need, and parasites have killed off a large number of honeybees, but insecticide is one major cause. And I've only picked a few examples from this article, but I assume we'll post the whole thing to the show notes. It's actually surprisingly easy to read. I'm a psychologist. I study humans and culture, but I was able to understand everything that the authors were saying about biodiversity and extinction. And I guess the useful takeaway isn't as useful to humans as it is to the world's insects. But I suppose that if you're listening to this and you're an animal or insect lover, I hope that you'll spread the word about the dangers of insecticide and the fact that perhaps our response to murder hornets, which have been everywhere in the news recently, could actually be deadlier than the hornets themselves.
So we're saying that the murder hornets are not necessarily even in your area.
Well, they've only been documented in one county of the United States, Whatcom County in northwest Washington. And they haven't even established themselves there. Just a few dead murder hornets were found in that area. And so it's possible that murder hornets are living in the U.S. right now. And they are very dangerous if provoked and by swarms, but they are not as established as people think they are. And everyone's been calling in and telling conservation groups and professors about murder hornets in their backyard, when really that hasn't been the case.
I was looking at a map here. Whatcom County is just south of Vancouver, so northernmost part of the American West Coast.
Yeah, and it makes sense that they'd be documented there because, that's the closest part of America to Japan and China.
Do we know how many people are killed, like in places where these insects are endemic?
Yeah, I've done some research into that. The numbers are pretty hard to pin down because often hornet deaths are grouped together. And so, for example, in Japan, between 10 and 20 people are killed every year by hornets, but it's difficult to know what percentage of those people are killed by Asian giant hornets and which percentage are killed by other kinds of hornets which occupy those areas. There was one year in China where 40 people were killed by giant Asian hornets, but I think that was an outlier. And so I think it's safe to assume that in Japan and China combined, probably, a fairly small proportion of people compared to all the other ways you can die.
I remember all the fear about killer bees about 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, African bees, right?
Yeah. But it's another story I never really followed. I don't know what came of that. Is that actually a thing that is a problem?
I have no clue whether it still is, but I remember hearing about that too, and now nobody talks about it.
Right.
So, Josh, in this case, in the abstract, they particularly talk about habitat loss and conversion to intensive agriculture and urbanization. So it seems like if I, as a person, individually wanted to slow down the decline of the entomofauna, the best thing might be to reduce the amount of food I eat and just in general amount of habitat I occupy.
Yeah, well, a lot of these things sort of bleed into each other. Insecticide use, agriculture use, both correlate highly with one another. Urbanization can introduce new pathogen strains into species. And a lot of these trends are macro trends that single people can't do very much about. I think that if you as an individual person wanted to do something, even if it was small, you could probably buy less insecticide. You could try to buy organic foods. And probably most of all right now, you could try to vote for politicians and public officials who care about endangered species in the US and around the world.
So when I met some beekeepers, they told me that something important is to leave out flowers in your garden that are endemic to the region that you're from or where you are, because most people want to put the pretty flowers or what other flowers that seem important, but actually harm the diversity because European honeybees might be accustomed to them, but the native honeybees aren't. So is that a huge factor? Can we increase the entomofauna or the biodiversity by planting flowers in our backyard?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, this article doesn't specifically talk about that as a measure, and this isn't really in my expertise, but they do speak about artificially changing the landscape a lot. And so, I mean, especially if you have a large yard or a big garden, if you can try to be consistent with the native flora in your area, then that seems pretty consistent with what they're saying is a healthy step for insects.
Well, shall we move on to Avaneesh's article?
Yeah, absolutely. So what George said was completely right. Murder hornets do not have a huge risk to humans themselves, but murder hornets have a huge impact on the honeybee population. And honeybees are incredibly important for the ecosystem. And currently, honeybees are incredibly important as pollinators in lots of for agriculture. So, in particular, I think almonds in California, lots honeybee keepers, they bring in lots of hives, like hundreds of thousands of honeybees, in order to pollinate. So there's a huge risk that if the Japanese giant hornet comes in, or the Asian giant hornet comes in and starts invading the continental US, then very soon you're going to have this huge fall in the population of honeybees, which again is going to be devastating for both agriculture and the ecology of the area. So one of the questions is, hornets have been in Japan and Asia for a long time. These particular hornets have been in Japan and Asia for a long time. And honeybees over there seem to be fine. And the reason is that because Japanese honeybees have lived next to these giant hornets for so long, they have adapted to handle these giant hornets. So, in order to try to understand one of the adaptations, which, by the way, is one of the coolest things, I found this paper, which was the first paper to describe it, and it's titled "Unusual Thermal Defense by a Honeybee Against Mass Attack by Hornets," which is a very, very cool title. I've never seen unusual in a title before. But this phenomena that I'm going to be talking about, which is the unusual thermal defense of this title, is known as thermoballing. Some people call it bee-balling, though there are many different forms of bee-balling. But so just to take a step back and understand how the hornet attacks, there are 4 distinct phases to the hornet's attack. The first phase, one of the hornets will go and find a honeybee nest, and then it'll kill the individual bees and then take them back to its nest to feed the larvae. But then what it does is, after it does a couple of trips, it will put a pheromone from something called the Van der Waals gland. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So it'll put the pheromone on or near the bee colony. And so then it enters the recruitment phase. So a lot of the other hornets will start noticing this pheromone, and they will come to this pheromone, and they will come to the nest in order to attack it. That's when they start with the third phase, which the authors over here call the slaughter phase, where soon after marking, the hornets from all the same nest come in and they congregate at the marked site, and they start individually hunting the honeybees. Now, at this point, they are still individually hunting them, and then they are taking the honeybees that they've killed back. That the way they kill is pretty impressive. They decapitate the head of the honeybee using their mandibles, which is, if you've ever seen a hornet, they have this jaw. It has like this, they look like claws on the jaw itself, but basically they're like pincers which grab the head and decapitate the honeybee. I'm sorry if that's very graphic. But at that point, if the honeybees start retaliating, then the hornets will just go out against the entire hive. And each hornet can kill up to 40 European honeybees per minute with its mandibles. And a colony of 30,000 bees can be killed in 3 hours by a group of just 20 to 30 hornets.
Jeez. Tough episode for bees.
So they just entirely decimate the hive. And then they go on to occupy the hive. And this occupation period, which lasts around 10 days, they basically just take out whatever bee larvae and pupae that they have and go feed their larvae. So you can see how devastating even a small population of hornets can be to the bee population, because 20 to 30 of them can destroy a colony in a matter of hours. So this is a huge problem against the European honeybee, which are particularly common in North America. But the Japanese honeybees have adapted. So Individual honeybees can't really do much because the hornets have hard cuticles. So a sting doesn't really damage the hornet. But what the bees can do is that they collectively attack the hornet, and what they do is around 100 workers will crawl around the nest entrance, and when the hornet approaches, they simultaneously lift and shake their abdomens and then escape to the nest, and then they call for reinforcements, and more than 1,000 workers leave the comb and wait just inside the entrance. And if a foraging hornet tries to enter because they were lured by the workers that were outside, 500 of these worker bees will quickly engulf the hornet in a ball for about 20 minutes. And they are able to increase the temperature of the ball that they create inside by contracting their thoracic muscles, and they increase the temperature to 47 degrees, which is lethal to the hornet but not to the bees. So the hornets die at around 44 to 45 degrees Celsius, but then the honeybee dies at around 48 to 50. So there is this small range in which the hornet dies but the bee lives, and they're able to regulate their temperature, keep it at that temperature for about 20 minutes, and kill the hornet. There are other factors as well. At this point, they're also stinging the honeybee to some extent, which, although it does not kill them, it does weaken them. And there are other papers that talk about how they basically asphyxiate them by smothering them. So they reported the temperature where hornets die at 44 to 46, but another one reports it as 48. And one of the ways that they say that they can resolve this discrepancy is by if they account for carbon dioxide. So if you make a ball and you smother the hornet inside, then it's more resistant to heat because it does not have all of the functionality, I guess, in order to survive. And so it's able to kill it. That was a bit intense. Do you guys have any questions?
So 47 degrees Celsius is 117 Fahrenheit, which is not too far off from how hot it is in California right now.
Yeah.
It's over 100 in the Central Valley.
Better not move south, I guess.
Yeah. I know, right? Yeah, I guess that would restrict their... I guess that's to be expected.
Yeah, so when I was reading about it in the newspapers, they were talking about how the spread of the murder hornets is going to be limited because they need they need cool areas, and so they suspect that even if they come to California or in other areas, it would be in altitude.
Mm-hmm.
I also read that they often settle around the bases of mountains, and they can't really live in flatlands, and so that would also restrict their movements.
So one question at this point is, okay, well, why are Japanese honeybees able to do it, but European honeybees are not? So the Japanese honeybee seems to be able to detect the pheromones that the hornets are releasing, and then they use the pheromones to lure the first attackers into the nest when they are then killed in the defensive ball, because again, individually they stand no chance against these hornets. So they reduce the likelihood of a mass attack. They have kind of like a kamikaze honeybee that will go in and then will die for the entire nest, basically. What is important to note is that this process of creating a ball and then heating up the interior is actually pretty common among bees. So they do it not only for invaders but also for queen bees. So if one queen bee loses the ability to lay eggs, then they will just go and kill the queen bee that way. So a lot of beekeepers do this. They will clip the wings of a queen bee if they want to get rid of that queen bee. And at that point, they don't need to kill the queen bee itself. The honeybees will come and kill it, because if you kill the queen bee, then the worker bees think that they're being attacked. Mm-hmm. Also, it is a huge problem when they want to introduce another queen bee, because then the worker bees recognize that the queen bee is foreign, so they will kill the queen bee that way. Also, other honeybees in other places, such as Cyprus, have also demonstrated this form of smothering the hornet. So, in some cases, it is by temperature, in some cases, it is by carbon dioxide smothering, so basically asphyxiation. But in general, it seems to be something that's fairly common in the bee world. But in each of these cases, the species are specifically adapted to the predator that is prevalent in that region. So, in particular, with the giant hornet, they rely on the pheromones in order to detect the presence of the giant hornet and then to react in that way, which the European honeybees in North America have not developed that ability to do. It is entirely possible that they will develop that ability, but it is entirely possible that in the process of doing so, their populations will go down to a very, very small fraction of what they are currently.
That's so interesting. So these bee species have the ability to smother. It's just about the pheromone detection.
I don't know if it's particularly the pheromone detection in each case, but I was trying to find out why European honeybees cannot kill the Japanese giant hornet. And it seems to be the case that the only function that the Japanese honeybees have that the others don't is detecting this pheromone. But I don't know for sure.
I wonder what European bees can do that Japanese bees can't. They seem kind of helpless right now.
Well, presumably these Japanese honeybees are, evolving their defenses to the hornets as the hornets are evolving their abilities to murder honeybees. And then when those hornets get introduced to a new environment with a different set of bees that haven't evolved alongside them, then those bees are outmatched and don't have a hope of catching up, I would assume. Maybe that's a very layperson's understanding of predator versus prey evolution. I don't know.
Absolutely. In fact, so one of the subspecies of the European honeybee uses this to confront another hornet in Europe, which is a mild predator, which is not that much of a problem in Europe. So I don't know if Japanese honeybees can attack that hornet.
And so these pheromones might be different enough that they're sort of matched to the predator-prey dynamics in that region. A European honeybee might be better matched to European hornets, and a Japanese honeybee might be a good match for Japanese murder hornets.
Exactly.
This is one of those articles where we should change the name of the show to Interesting Science, because unless we have a lot of honeybee listeners.
I have a feeling like maybe 50 or 60% of our listeners are beekeepers. I've just heard that before.
But even then, like, what are they going to do? Train their bees how to play b-ball?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that probably it's definitely on people's minds, the risk that these hornets pose to bees and to people. And I mean, I think that probably the message from my article is that it's not as big as we think it is. Don't go out and buy all the pesticide you can. Avaneesh's article would probably mean do your best to protect bees if hornets are establishing themselves here.
I know. Maybe that's the message. The message from Article 1 is it's not such a big deal. But the message from Article 2 is it might be a big deal and we better pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely ecologically. I think it's a big deal. From all of the articles I was reading, all the beekeepers are freaking out.
Yeah.
Poor bees, just getting beaten up at every turn in this episode.
So what's the predator that eats the hornets that we can introduce here?
There is a very cool video online of this praying mantis.
There we go.
Have you seen this video?
No,
I haven't.
This is kind of crazy and a bit disgusting, but basically what they do is they crack open the skull of the hornet and they just eat the brains. And then they start working through the entire body and leave nothing.
Jeez, praying mantises are vicious.
Yeah.
They do some crazy things. They're such sweet-looking animals.
Are they sweet-looking animals? I've never heard anybody describe praying mantises as sweet-looking animals.
As a kid, I thought they were so cool.
Yeah.
On the vein of YouTube videos, I've seen videos of these murder hornets kill even rats.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah, I read that that's rats are what people, or mice and rats are what they usually use to detect the venom amounts. They do experimental studies with rats, and then this is how they're able to tell how much venom hornets inject and the kind of how lethal that venom is. So giant Asian hornets or Japanese giant hornets, they go by a few names. Their venom actually isn't the most lethal of all the hornet species. The only reason it's so deadly to animals, including humans, is that they inject so much of it. They can inject more in a single sting than any other hornet. And so it's size that matters here.
Well, shall we wrap things up?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry if we just gave all of our listeners nightmares.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it was particularly graphic, but there's no other way of describing what I just read.
Oh, yeah. And also, speaking of YouTube videos, you can see what Avaneesh is talking about on YouTube. There are a bunch of videos of Japanese honeybees killing hornets by asphyxiating and overheating them. And so if you just type in exactly those words, you can probably find a bunch of these really interesting videos online, if that's what you're into.
The actual process of watching them smother is not that violent because they basically just asphyxiate or like cook the hornet, but it's not like they burn or anything. It's just that they just faint or
Just looks
die.
like a ball of bees, I imagine.
Yeah. But then if you were to watch the videos of the hornet coming in and just killing all the bees, that can be very graphic.
And would you say it was like 40 bees in a minute? It's like a John Wick movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 40 European honeybees per minute, all with its mandibles. So I don't even know how these pincers are moving so fast.
It's crazy to watch. I've seen those videos too.
Wow. All right. Well, let's wrap things up then. Everybody, all our listeners can go down some YouTube rabbit holes. Watch some murder hornet videos. Well, that's our show. You can find the show notes in your podcasting app. We will include links in the show notes to the articles that we talked about. We always enjoy your feedback, and you can reach us on Reddit at /r/usefulscience. You can reach us via email at podcast@usefulscience.org, and you can reach us on Twitter at usefulsci. We want to thank our great editor at the Moorhead Planetarium, whose name is Vivian Lee. We want to thank the composer for our intro music, who is Solomon Cross Imla. My name is Cameron Spencer. You can get more information about me at my website, lab43.com, if you're interested in hiring me for a web design development project.
My name is Joshua Conrad Jackson. You can find me on Twitter at Josh_C_Jackson.
And my name is Avaneesh.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a very useful week.
All right. That was a fun one to record.
Yeah, very fun. And I think that I think it was good.